Okay, hello everybody. My name is Kafamdi Anene. I am making this video at the Marriott West Chase in Houston, Texas, the venue that the Supreme Leader of the Indigenous People of Biafra has just concluded his presentation to the Houston community. And I have a gentleman here with me that a lot of people have been introduced to him in the through the social networks, either Facebook or YouTube. And I would like to have him introduce himself. He too was present at today's presentation by Maize Nnamdi Kanu. So, gentlemen, could you tell us who you are and what brought you here?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for giving me a chance to come on to your interview. My name is Clayton Udoh. I'm from IPOB State. I'm here in Houston. I came to listen to Nnamdi Kanu, the Supreme Leader, and to really do an introspection or to do a kind of validation of what he's talking about. A much more deeper, intrusive entry into his world, just to find out what it's all about and to see if his principles and his message and his guidelines as far as saving the people of the Niger Delta region fall within the same boundaries as mine.
Okay, you mentioned the Niger Delta. Does it mean you are from that geographical space that we call the Niger Delta? And
Well,
if so, what part of Nigeria are you from?
The part of Nigeria I'm from is IPOB State, which was one of the states that was carved out from the original Cross River State. Again, also, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Very
So
stable.
I am from IPOB State. I think the most important aspect of the whole story is that we have to look at the idea that the concept of Niger Delta has been fragmented. Some people say they're from the Niger Delta, some people say we're not part of the Niger Delta. But I want to let everybody who's watching this interview know that the propaganda that led to the fragmentation is not your fault. We're just victims of that propaganda. We are all from one region that is heavily, and I repeat, heavily marginalized. And the construct called Nigeria is no more feasible anyway.
Okay, I see what you mean by no more feasible because actually Biafra, the IPOB doctrine is embedded in it the non-feasibility of a continuation within the polity of Nigeria. So, but you say that you came here to hear for yourself, almost like you are putting the organization under question whether they are on the path of remaining within Nigeria or on the path of moving out of Nigeria, since you yourself said it's not feasible. So why did you come to this with that spirit of inquisition rather than with the spirit of affirmation that you have found a home, that the people advocate that which you also believe in?
Actually, when I came here, I discovered that I have found a home. And it is a home in the sense of that we do share one ideology and one agreement. Nigeria is no more feasible. It's a joke at this stage. However, where we may have the situation in which I needed to come and listen to what he had to say more was because of the idea of the big question, which is how are we going to make it happen? If we all agree that Nigeria is no more working and that the construct of Biafra is a much more logical conclusion for those of us who want to have a change in our destinies and a change in our lineages as far as the history of our lineages are concerned, and in the well-being of a group of people that have 90% of the resources of the country, then how are we going to do it was a big question, like I said. And that's where we have the varying opinions, different opinions on how it's going to be done.
Okay. Incidentally, I myself too am from the region you may describe as the Niger Delta area, because my state in Nigeria is actually Delta State.
That's right.
However, when I look at the struggle for Biafra, I look at it more like an existential threat that we are facing within Nigeria. In the fact that our lives are constricted, freedom constricted, actually lives are endangered. I do not really look much at the resources that the land holds for me. I'm simply looking at the liberation of the person within that land. And then all the resources that are there, to me, are more incidental than they are consequential to my desire to have that freedom. But unfortunately, a lot of other folks that look at the Niger Delta look at it more as a resource, a struggle for resource control. And that has also engendered a conflict with the Igbos, because part of the propaganda of Nigeria is that the Igbos are looking for your oil, and they forget that Igbos also have oil. And from my experience, those that are fighting for Biafra are looking very little at the resources of the land. They believe that their human resources exceed those of the land resources. Where do you come in here? Do you agree also that we need to de-emphasize the resources when we talk about Niger Delta, and that may also be contributing to their vacillation in joining the Biafran struggle?
The Biafran struggle is twofold. It is an internal struggle, and the Biafran struggle is also an external struggle. And when we look at the external struggle, we come into the geopolitical situation of the world today. One of the greatest mistakes I would identify among any person, in fact, with any person that is in Nigeria or outside Nigeria that's involved in the Biafran struggle or trying to perpetuate the zoo, is that the biggest mistake is for us to say it's not a resource-based conflict. Because already the War Arena's conflict is resource-based. Is resource-based. If we go into the history, and I'm going to give it in a very short version of what I'm trying to say, is that the devaluation of Nigeria's currency and the devaluation of African currency is not by coincidence. It is resource-based. Of course, the story that is told to us is that, hey, guess what? We took loans from the World Bank, and we took this, we took that, we asked for external help, and so therefore for us to be able to return that help, they need to devalue our currency, which will attract investors. It is all an international global scam of the highest order. This devaluation, which has led to the destruction in some ways of African economies and has led to the Western world coming to pick up the resources of Africa for pennies on the dollar, is also what is happening in a much more macro version inside Nigeria, in which we now have another problem that we have to face, which is the hegemony of the Fulani, the Hausa Fulani group. And so Biafra is actually a struggle of people who are terribly oppressed. First, the Hausa Fulani hegemony that oppresses us. Second, the foreign powers hegemony, which oppresses Africa, which oppresses our country. Okay. So the breaking away of Biafra from this system would lead to something that we would never see with the zoo. You know, and please excuse me just to explain the zoo is Nigeria, and that's what we describe it as now. The zoo will never see a situation where the devaluation of the currency is removed from it. No, it is not in the best interest of the foreign powers to remove the devaluation of Nigerian currency, because it helps them to get our resources for nothing and resources in Africa for nothing. It's not going to happen. And the hyperinflation that comes with that, the running hyperinflation, cannot be controlled until the day we can have our money come into the power as the money that we're competing against. So therefore, Biafra has to happen for us to start a clean slate. The slate we're writing on now is done. It's finished. We need a clean slate. And for us to have that clean slate, we must agree on one thing. It is a resource-based struggle, both in Nigeria and outside Nigeria.
Okay, some people will say that actually that Biafra will be granted its independence if the Biafrans actually commit to dispensing of those land resources to those that have a stake on it. However, during the Civil War, I think one of the Biafran ambassadors that visited the Soviet Union did indicate that part of the problem they faced was was fleshed out when they visited the Soviet Union for support. And the foreign minister of the Soviet Union then, Andrei Gromyko, intimated to him, called him to the corner to tell him why Biafra was never going to see support from the Europeans. And what he did was to tell him that the Europeans generally are afraid of another Japan out of Africa. That is the human resource, the mind of the Biafran, that they think less of the resources of Biafra land. They are more concerned about the mental resources of the Biafrans. And if the Biafrans become a nation of theirs, their wonders will happen where the European may become displaced, just like Japan displaced them. And that's actually what has held us in captivity. On many occasions, Mazen Nnamdi Kanu has also said, Britain, you can have our oil. We can give it even to you for free. But we need our space. We need control over our person. And right now, it's not happening, which means the struggle is less of the resource, because those who rule us right now don't even own the resource. They are the agents that have been deputized, commissioned by the foreign powers to subdue those who do have the resource. So if it was more about the resources, they could easily carve out Biafra that has the resource and tell the others, go, you don't have nothing to offer. But they are more in a police, a deputizing capacity for the colonial masters to subdue us mentally. And you don't think that that's the case with Biafra, that is less of a material, a resource-based struggle for those who oppose it than a suppression of what could occur if these folks are liberated. The black man could put their theory of inferiority to shame.
It's not really about a black man putting their fear of inferiority to shame, as like it is more about the strength of currencies.
Okay.
The American dollar, which we know is a fiat currency,
Sure.
it has no resources to back it, but it's being accepted as one of the most powerful currencies in the world by word of mouth.
Okay.
Then we have Britain and the euro, that are really currencies that are not actually also resource-based, but are based on political maneuvering within the geopolitical arena of the world. So what we are having here is not really about a Japan, because if it does become a Japan, we are not excluding the fact that we are welcoming, we do welcome the foreign powers, we do welcome foreigners, we do welcome people from all over the world to come in and invest in this particular country. It is more of a fear of the destruction of their economies, not based on us, but based on that they will now have to buy resources for the true amounts that they are worth.
Okay.
There has been a long-standing fear that if the United States, if Britain, and if all these foreign countries have to come to Africa and pay for the true value of the resources they've been taking for almost free, that their own economies will suffer and may lead to the collapse of their own economies. That is the fear. Not the fear that we are in Japan, because if you look at it very closely, Japan has a lot of alliances with the United States, with Britain, a lot of technology coming from there into the Western world. Japan pretty much is a very strong ally of the G9 countries. You know.
So you mean inherent in that argument is that those who hold the status quo of having the resource owners under lock and key do think or do know that they have a better ability to bargain for a fairer market value for their products than those that they have deputized with the power over them.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, excuse me for coming in that way. This is going to be the first true break we may have from the effects of the colonial occupation of Africa. Africa is still suffering in various ways, which is really, really horrific, from the aftermath of the colonial incursion into Africa. We're still suffering from it. That incursion, Biafra will be the first true entity to break away totally from the effects of that incursion, because we are ready at this point not to inherit the effects of that incursion. Now, one of the effects of that incursion was even the power systems that was based in Nigeria, how Nigeria was arranged those who were supposed to have the power, which were the Hausa Fulani, those who were supposed to have the education, those who were supposed to be the servicemen, the industrialists, as the case may be. There was an inherent system that was created. And then when they saw that Africa was on the same level, the footing level, that inherent structure was used against Africa by itself. So we are breaking away from the Hausa Fulani hegemony. They rule Nigeria by default from the colonial incursion and were given the pass by the colonial masters and are still under the colonial masters politically in the way they operate and they do their things. What we are looking at here, that's the greatest fear is, can we have an African country, that's a big question now, that owes nothing to the World Bank all over again, that owes no IMF loans, that cannot have its currency messed up and devalued and touched, that can actually track its own pathway with its own resources being paid for at fair market value, fair market value without us having a situation where they're coming to pick it up from us for peanuts, and then at that point we are able to open up and create new buffer zones, economic buffer zones that are outside what is known for now. It's something outside the paradigm. That is what they're afraid of at this point. A new Dubai, not necessarily something like a new Japan, but a new wealth base, because where the wealth is where the power is. A new wealth base.
Okay, how come it has taken these many years for individuals of the Biafra land, especially those that say they own the resources, to come to terms of the fact that they are actually being separated from the proceeds of the resources that come forth from their land? Do you think that IPOB should be given a lot of credit for maybe bringing it to the consciousness of the average Biafran that this is the power relationship and that something has to give, and that which has to give is the creation of a new Biafra?
Yeah, and I want to thank my viewers for watching us up to this point in time. And please excuse me if there's any grammatical errors that I made maybe along trying to get my
we're not English
across.
people.
We're not,
we're
so,
all Nigerians.
Here is the aspect that you brought forward, which is very, very interesting. Biafra is fraught with traitors, people who betrayed the trust of their own people. There has been a lot of events that has shown that everybody has pretty much lived for himself, by himself, to the detriment of others. So we are lucky, unfortunately, I would use the word luck there, to have a series of events that is making us to begin to understand that we're all in the same boat together and that either we get this done or we all perish together. Some people are still in the illusion of that they're going to still continue to liaise with the Hausa Fulani hegemony and have their empires and the little money that they've stashed away for themselves. But we want to let them know that it's an illusion. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any headway. The Hausa Fulani hegemony is not based on education. It's not based on logic. Is based on a ridiculous system of control, power and control, which has nothing to do with the well-being of the people. Hence, we hear these shouts for Sharia all over the country. Hence, we see, like, for example, the recent events in Zamfara state where the governor, he's not interested in alleviating even the poverty we even see even in the north. He's not interested in alleviating poverty, in bringing more education to his people. He's just interested in religious demagoguery. These are the kind of leaders we even had in Igbo land. People who are interested in political advantages over to the detriment of the people, religious demagoguery. These people have delayed the hopes and the dreams of the people to achieve Biafra. Another thing was we have been distracted, not once, not twice. When things get better a little bit, then we shelf the idea of Biafra on the table. But whenever we have this rebound of the true state of where we are in, just because we had a little windfall during the Jonathan Goodluck era doesn't mean that Biafra was something that should have been shelved as an idea. So now we have seen that things have become so bad that shelving it one more time is not going to be to our own interest. And that is why it's time for us to have Biafra.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because Mazen Nnamdi Kanu on many occasions have tried to remind the folks from Akwa Ibom that the second in command, who subsequently became the first in command towards the tail end of the Biafran war with Nigeria
Was Colonel Philip
was
Effiong.
he was a general at that point at the tail end, but Colonel Philip Effiong
That's right.
was the second in command.
That's right.
And these were roles that they played very willingly, without coercion, because they knew they belonged in the natural geographical space of Biafra. However, most people that got introduced to your presence in social media got introduced to you by the fact that you almost insinuated that the IPOB movement was more or less an Igbo movement, given the coloration of usurpation of that movement by the Igbos. And I heard you question when you came up to ask questions of Mazen Nnamdi Kanu. The first question you asked was for those who were from Akwa Ibom in the audience to stand. Apparently, only about 3 people stood up. Will you use that as a gauge of the inclusiveness of the movement, or rather a gauge of the passivity of the people of Akwa Ibom? Because this call has gone out to everybody equally. But if they're hearing it and not responding, would that be a fault of IPOB or a fault of the people of Akwa Ibom?
I would say both. I think that IPOB needs to do more work, and this is my own personal opinion. IPOB needs to do more work in selling its case. Not because people don't know about the concept of Biafra. A lot of people in Akwa Ibom have heard about it, but because of fear. The concept of Biafra is a construct that accompanying it in the minds of a lot of people is fear. What happens to my job? What happens to the property I had? What happens if I'm no more working for a central system, like if I was a federal worker, federal civil service? If I was working in the banks, what happens to the banks? How soon do we recover? Okay, I was holding Naira, then suddenly I wake up one day and the Naira is no more legal tender in my hand. It has to become some kind of Biafra currency. How quickly will that kick in? How quickly do certain things kick in for us to have normalcy? This is a fear that has to be addressed, whether we like it or not. And based on this fear, a lot of people don't want to have anything to do with Biafra.
But don't you think that those same fears are in existence in the minds of the Igbos? But in spite of those fears, they have evaluated the situation and found that there's no hope in Nigeria. Why don't you put that onus of overcoming those fears on their own on those same minority tribes, rather than allotting the blame solely on the Igbos?
No, it's not a blame. It's not a blame game. It's not a blame game, and I will correct that English. It's not a blame on the Igbos. The Igbos have been badly treated. The Igbos they're facing a catastrophe, from infrastructure of the lands they're living in, down to how they're treated at the federal level, down to how they have been treated in these recent incursions of IPOB and in these recent activities that have ensued based on them trying to ask for some kind of recognition, some kind of leeway as far as the attainment of the pleasures of life is concerned, the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of justice, the pursuit of being allowed to do well in a society. The Igbos have been treated very, very badly. Now, that's one aspect of this story. However, Akwa Ibom State's case turned drastically in the opposite direction, because when it became a state that had all this huge amount of money coming in from oil derivatives, we suddenly had a new generation of millionaires that were created in Akwa Ibom State. People saw this, and please again, we have to also look at sometimes the influence of the church on this. People saw this and they also heard in church them saying, your turn is coming. Your turn is coming. People were told in the society, it's happening among us. It's just for you to be patient and do what's right. Pray to God, come to church, pay your tithes, do your seeds, do this, do that. And you will become like one of these superstars, the brand new superstars that come from the new oil derivation amounts being sent to Akwa Ibom State and this newfound wealth. People saw this, and so when you go up to those kind of people and tell them what they're living in right now is an illusion, they don't believe you. Because the evidence on the ground doesn't look like an illusion.
Sure.
You see what I'm trying to
Sure,
say?
sure.
So that is why a Bible state is not blaming the Igbos, but they need persuasion to know that even the illusion they see is not going to last.
An illusion. And one other thing you notice in today's lecture, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu suggested that if everybody that's a Biafran overseas was committed to just $1 a month, that it can go a long way into funding the struggle in some way. And a lot of people also lambasted you for latching onto a so-called defense fund that may have been set up at a certain time within IPOB, and they are mostly saying if you did not contribute to a defense fund, why would you have an interest in the defense fund? Because these are areas of scandal that are actually thrown at the movement by the traitors of the movement. Why did you see that to be a cogent question to ask about a defense fund when you had not participated in the build-up of that fund?
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to come into the issue of the defense fund, and I think you're giving me a chance to defend my own side of the story. I do know that there's a possibility that we may not attain Biafra without shots fired.
Okay.
Even though I've spoken to people, and a lot of people have told me straight up, they've told me, no, we don't want shots fired.
Okay.
We want a diplomatic resolving of the issue. We want some other way than shots fired based on the amount of property we have there, our businesses, our loved ones, which is the most important, as the case may be. However, let us look at it from the point which I feel, I don't know why, but it's based, I think, sometimes more on the evidence I have at hand, that shots will be fired.
Okay.
I have a gut intuition plus the evidence at hand. If shots will be fired, I am alarmed if it's going to happen and the people are caught napping, or the people are caught, unawares of what's about to befall them. That's why I brought up the issue of the defense fund. Where is it? Where is it when we know we're hearing Meyite Allah, we're hearing all these recent incursions, heavy, and I mean there's this sudden serious incursions of wanting the Fulanese in the south.
Okay.
This cow herding thing or whatever. Why these sudden incursions? And there's now, from what we're hearing as evidence, military arms are being brought in as a backup for this incursion to happen.
You don't think it could have been more proper to direct their question about funding of a defense to directing it to the constituted authorities of the Biafran state, like the governors that actually have a budgetary allotment for security, rather than to an IPOB that is simply a freedom fighting outfit that is not as fully funded as the states? Because Miyetti Allah, not only are they acquiring their funds from the jihadist movement all over the world, but the Nigerian government is in collusion with them. So the Nigerian state is funneling the Nigerian funds. So a question regarding defense fund towards IPOB has to be logically misplaced, because they are not an entity that can match, dollar to dollar with the Miyetti Allah that is actually in the coffers of the federal government. You don't think you played your hand into the trap of those saboteurs that always use financial scandal to talk negative things about IPOB and its movement?
No, and the reason why I say no is because it's not a scandal yet.
Okay,
it's not a scandal. It becomes a scandal based on how you handle it.
Okay.
So let's say I came over to IPOB and said, "Hey, where's the defense fund?" IPOB would come in and say, "Okay, you know what? The defense fund exists. There is a defense fund. We would be very, very happy to show you the paperwork or to show you whatever is involved here if you come to us." Okay. That's the end of that. It's no big deal. However, like I said, I think my great fear now is that if there is a defense fund, and if the defense fund exists, which I believe it does exist, I think it does exist, now is the time when you consider the incursions being made into the southern side of Nigeria. Now is the time for it to kick in. Now, let me correct an impression that has been made. One impression that has been made is he's a saboteur. No, I'm not asking how much. I'm not asking the location. I'm not even asking what will it be used for.
Okay.
All I'm asking is where is it would be more of like, is it okay? Is it there? And then all they would say to me, all I would have expected is it's there, and whatever it is to be used for, it will be used for.
Were you by such a questioning reposing your security, the security responsibility of your person of Biafra land on IPOB rather than on the state, the nation Nigeria, or the individual states? Because such a question about security being placed on an organization rather than on the government that is actually, constituted to defend. That's one of their primary responsibilities, the defense of the people. When someone goes beyond requesting of such a budget from the government and then places it on an organization, it looked like a mockery was being made, a fishing expedition.
No, it wasn't a mockery. It wasn't a mockery.
So do you concede within yourself or publicly that that line of inquiry would be inappropriate to an organization such as
No. What you call upon is what you call upon determines how we expect you to act.
Okay.
If you're calling for the creation of Biafra, then we expect you to be able to defend what you call for.
Okay.
You see what I'm trying to say?
Okay.
Your question has two parts to it. Part number one is that the zoo cannot and is in no good standing, and we cannot hold them in any trust to be able to protect the lives, the people, and the property of the southern section of Nigeria, or even the Niger Delta region, or whatever you want to call those regions as we speak now. The zoo, the construct called the zoo of Nigeria, they are no more. They've been compromised by religious demagoguery. They're compromised by corruption. They're compromised by a lack of vision on what to do to alleviate the poverty of the people and to bring a sense of well-being and prosperity to the people. They are totally compromised. So for us to direct this to talk about, like, for example, the security vote of the governors in the core Igbo states, we're just making fun. It's part of the money that is being embezzled by these gentlemen in question. Akwa Ibom, River State, the security votes are no more used for security as far as we're concerned. That's the first point of your question. The second side of your question is, if IPOB is calling for something as big as what we call territorial, there's a word for it. We want to break across territory. We want to break territorial boundaries.
Sure.
So if we're calling for the solution of territorial integrity, you must be able to defend it. It's a serious issue. It's a serious matter that you must be able to defend. And in most extreme cases, may lead to defense that is of a military kind. Because it's not something that is spoken of lightly.
But the IPOB leadership has actually said that they are going the path of referendum, the same type that led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. There was no exchange of guns. The Soviet Union simply overnight dissolved and granted each warring state their independence. Just like East Germany eventually merged with West Germany, and there was no exchange of gunfire. A lot of states have come into existence without gunfire. Even Brexit was cited as an example of Britain that entered into a union and also through a vote exited that union. That all IPOB was interested in is not war, but a referendum to determine whether we want to stay or we want to leave. Why would somebody keep using the extreme scenario of war rather than going the path that has been promulgated by the group? That this is the pathway they are trying to follow, a referendum pathway. Is that something at variance with what you're saying?
Yes, there's variance, and I want to thank you for that question. I want to thank you very much for that question. And here's where the variance comes in. If you go into the United Nations Charter, the charter states very clearly that we give referendums to groups that were originally independent, and then they were incorporated into a larger entity.
Okay.
And then at some point, once their independence back,
Okay.
then we can give such groups referendum.
Okay.
Another thing that you see in United Nations Charter is that referendums can be given to groups that can prove beyond all reasonable doubt that one, that the central body has collapsed, like you're talking about the USSR, in where the central body is no more able to maintain the salaries, the protection,
The failed state
the
in effect.
livelihood of its satellite states.
Okay.
Then those states, knowing that the central system has
failed.
collapsed totally, can now call in for a referendum and break away, with assurance, of course, that they shall be able to take care of themselves, as the case may be. And so there's several of these variances that we have, there's several variations of what would bring up a referendum in the United Nations, of which Biafra does not qualify. Like the Supreme Leader said inside the hall, he said that the United Nations is more of a rubber stamp towards territorial integrity. And so based on that, if the United Nations wants to stand and really look into its own traditions and vote based on its traditions, then it would be that they would vote for the oneness of Nigeria as a country. Biafra doesn't qualify based on the rules of referendum. And then again, I would also want to give you precedence, the rule of precedence, that there is no African country in recent ages or in recent memory that has had a referendum. Eritrea didn't get a referendum. South Sudan, those areas. We've not heard of a referendum in Africa. I don't think in this our age or in this our era. We've never heard of one. It's not happened. If anybody has ever wanted to break away or to become free, it has been, and I mean the examples in Africa, has been through war.
Okay.
So the referendum is a very tricky thing. It's a very, very tricky game to play. And based on that, I have always defaulted to the extremes, which is the idea that it may be that we would have to do like the other examples we've seen in our era, which would be the exchange of gunfire. Now, it's based on my logical conclusions, my analysis.
Sure.
Do I wish that personally? No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So having heard all that from you, let's just wrap up by asking you what was your impression of today's speech by Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, and what has it swayed you in any way to formally pledge your allegiance to the movement, or you still have misgivings on whether to join or not to join the IPOB movement?
He said something that I loved, which was that whether it didn't matter if it was Biafra, it didn't matter if it was it didn't matter if it was IPOB. Excuse me for that. It didn't matter if it was IPOB. It didn't matter if it was the Lower Niger Congress or so. As long as you're fighting for Biafra, you're welcome.
Yeah, but that's an inherent contradiction, because the Lower Niger stuff that Tony Nadi them are all going around with, it's not actually a fight for Biafra, because he made it clear, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu made it clear, a lot of these organizations are actually looking for a Biafra within a Nigeria, and that's a non-starter for the IPOB movement. Are you personally committed to a total break with your Nigerian nationality, or are you still, sitting on the fence on whether you're fully Biafran? Because you have to make that exit first mentally.
No. Mentally, the exit. I've done the exit already.
Okay,
yeah. If it is the exit, I've done that exit already mentally.
Okay.
However, and if at all, I've not really gone into the teachings of the Lower Niger Congress and the ideologies that they possess. It's not feasible for you